Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Asheville City Council budget work session, one of several budget work sessions. My name is Esther Mannheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville. This is your City Council, and I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Campbell, our City Manager, to lead us through this work session.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and good afternoon, everyone. Excuse me. We're going to have Taylor Floyd, Tony McDowell, and Chris Coral are going to provide you with the majority of the speaking points or the presentations for our work session today. What we will do, though, is we're going to focus a lot on what we think are going to be the key drivers for this budget process. And a lot of that is going to land on the compensation side. Also, we have a major decision that needs to be made as it relates to one of our capital assets, which is McCormick Field. And so this meeting is not for you to make a decision about McCormick Field. It is for us to provide you with more detailed information from a budget context, impacts on other capital items. And as we go into your work session later on, business meeting, that is where we are scheduled for you all to make a decision on this item. So with that, I will turn it over to Tony McDowell to provide you with the overview of the presentation.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Ms. Campbell, and good afternoon, Mayor, City Council. Tony McDowell, Finance Director. I'm going to kick things off this afternoon with the presentation. As Ms. Campbell indicated, you'll also be hearing from Taylor Floyd, our Budget Manager, and Chris Coral, our Director of Community Regional Facilities. I know I'm missing missing a letter in there somewhere, but anyway. So what we're going to be talking about with you all this afternoon, just kind of a quick overview, the outline of the presentation. We're going to start by talking about some of our available resources, and we touched upon this a little bit at your council retreat. We're going to give you all a little more information today and talk some about our one-time revenues that maybe we didn't talk as much about at the retreat a few weeks ago. As Ms. Campbell mentioned, one of the biggest budget items for consideration is our compensation and benefits package for next fiscal year. So we'll spend some time talking to you all about that, as well as some of our other potential new investments in our budget. And then we'll finish up with the discussion with McCormick Field. Okay, as always, we'll start with some key takeaways from this presentation this afternoon. The first of those is that we do have some good revenue growth to report. And I think we shared this with you all at your retreat and also at the recent quarterly financial updates that we've been doing. We've had better than expected revenue growth in sales taxes over the last several years. So we're in a good position financially, but at the same time, we've seen rising costs eat up a lot of that revenue growth. And so those costs to provide existing services will, we think, use up most of the revenue growth that we're projecting for next year. We do think there's some opportunities to strategically invest in some one-time items for next year. We'll talk a little bit about some of those one-time revenues, fund balance, American Rescue Plan dollars, opioid settlement money, and we'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. Going back to that compensation and benefits item that we mentioned, we'll be looking for some direction from you all on how to attract and retain a talented workforce, and that really is a key to our budget development process. Primarily because it is such a large financial component of our budget. Knowing direction on that will allow us to then go back and craft a budget and hopefully include some investments in other areas as well. And then lastly, with McCormick Field, Chris Coral will be sharing with you all the latest plan for McCormick, and that incorporates some of the community concerns, the discussions around the broader facility use, and also an update on the financial plan for that project. Okay, just a reminder of where we're at in the process. You all have seen this slide several times. We're at March right now, so we're in, at least according to this slide, we're still in the priorities phase, but I think we're really moving toward that decision-making phase in April and May when we really start to need feedback from you all, feedback from the manager's office on where we want to go with next year's budget, which items we want to include, and begin to craft that proposed budget that we'll bring to you all at the 1st of May. At your retreat, I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, you all discussed your priorities for the coming fiscal year. And I would say you reaffirmed the existing priorities, and these are that list. The one tweak that we've highlighted there on the priorities was the inclusion of climate resiliency under the neighborhood and climate resilience priority. But other than that, all the priorities remained unchanged. And again, we will look to invest, as we look at the new investments for the upcoming fiscal year and where we put our new dollars, this is really the guiding document in terms of where we will look to put those dollars. We'll also, as usual, use the guiding principles that we've been utilizing for the last several years as we go through the budget process. That includes focusing on essential service delivery, making sure that the decisions we make in terms of investing new dollars enhance the value for our customers, and also, like I said, aligning our decisions with you all's priorities and strategies, as well as what the community wants to see us achieve, and also the internal and departmental work plans that we all have. So just quickly on available resources. So we talked a little bit with you all at your retreat, just to drill down a little bit more on some of our expected revenue growth in the general fund. As you all know, our two biggest revenue sources in the general fund are the property tax and sales tax. That's about 75% of our budget. Right now, we are looking at about 2% growth in our property tax base for next year. We are not planning on bringing forward any adjustments to the property tax rate for next year. So all the growth that we'll get from property taxes will be just from that natural growth in the property tax base. And right now, we're projecting a 2% growth in that base, which will bring in approximately $1.5 million in additional revenue next year. As for our sales taxes, as we've said, we've had really good growth over the last few years. We're seeing good growth again this year. Right now, we're projecting another 5% growth next year on top of our year-end estimates for this year, which will allow us to increase that budget by about $3.2 million next year. So we're looking at new revenue from those two primary revenue sources in the general fund of about $4.7 million next year. But as we mentioned, we're also seeing increased costs to deliver our existing services, particularly around compensation. And so we anticipate that most of that growth in revenue in those two primary revenue sources will be used up to meet our existing service delivery. And one thing we always like to highlight when we're at this point in the process is that these are all estimates and that they'll continue to change as we go through the process. And hopefully we'll be able to continue to see good sales tax growth, perhaps come back to you all in a month or two and increase our estimates. But there's obviously some volatility in the economy right now with the bank collapses and things like that. So we're definitely keeping our eye on those kinds of things.
Tony, I'd like to, when we mention this, bring up a point that I think just matters even more with the context of what's happening in downtown right now. So the state used to parse data so we could look at sales tax revenues by zip code, but they no longer allow us to do that. It's been about 10 years. But when we were able to study it, we were always able to quickly realize that the predominant amount of the sales tax revenues came from downtown. And I'd just like to share that in light of, what we're looking at with downtown and how risky it could be if we don't take care of it and so on. But and then sometimes we end up with like 10% growth here, right?
We have actually the last couple of years. I think it was 15% growth, and then the next year after that was 16% growth. We've seen over time, though, that kind of when you average it all out, it's usually around 5%. But there can be a lot of volatility with sales taxes, and if something were to go wrong with the economy and we were to go into recession or something like that, we could definitely see revenues actually decrease in that area. So. Okay, kind of moving into some of our potential one-time revenues that we could utilize in the budget, and we mentioned this to you all at your retreat. We do have fund balance that's above our policy goal at the moment, and that's primarily due to that strong sales tax growth that we've had the last couple of years. And we're recommending at this point in the budget process that we utilize up to $5 million in that fund balance to fund items in next year's budget. And we'd primarily like to focus that usage on one-time expenses as opposed to ongoing items. But we do anticipate that money being available to supplement the property and sales tax growth for next year's budget. Another additional revenue source that we wanted to highlight is the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA dollars that we have. As you all probably remember, we budgeted in the current year about $2 million from the ARPA allocation to support the general fund budget. With the strong growth that we're seeing in sales tax this year, we don't anticipate we'll need that money in this year's budget. So what we're proposing to you all is that we roll, if you will, roll that money forward and reappropriate it and utilize it to help fund items in next year's budget. So that would give us another $2 million to fund some potential one-time items in next year's budget. And then also as a reminder, and you all will be hearing an ARPA update tonight at your business meeting, that we still also have an additional $1.3 million above and beyond the $2 million that is currently unallocated, unbudgeted as well from the ARPA dollars. The other revenue source I wanted to highlight just quickly, a one-time revenue source, is the opioid settlement money. I know you all had a discussion, I think, at your meeting last Thursday about those dollars. So to date, just to kind of give you all an update on where we're at with that. So we got a planning grant from Dogwood Health Trust of $375 to help us come up with a plan to how we're going to utilize those opioid dollars. And we have hired a person to develop that plan, and the grant is being used to fund that position at the moment. In addition to that, we have received a first round of settlement dollars of $1.5 million that's being paid out over 16 years. To date, we've received about $200,000, but we have not budgeted or utilized any of that money as yet. And so that money is also available if we would like to consider that as part of this year's budget process. And then finally, as our city attorney shared with you all at your meeting last week, there is a second round of settlement money coming. The final amount hasn't been determined yet, but we're estimating that we're going to get somewhere around $1.2 million from that second round of settlement dollars as well. And again, much like that first round, it's going to flow in over several years. So just to summarize on the revenue part of the budget, growth in property and sales taxes continues to be good, in fact, very good, better than we have historically seen. But it still is not keeping up really with inflation and is not growing at the same pace as the cost of delivering services. As I mentioned, we do have some opportunities to fund some one-time strategic investments utilizing the ARPA dollars, our fund balance, and potentially the opioid money as well. And want to end my part of the presentation today with just highlighting again that economic uncertainty that can always impact the outlook as we move forward. So I think that is my last slide, and unless you all have any questions, I'll turn it over to Taylor. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon. So Tony got the easy part, talking about all the new resources that we have, and I have the less desirable part about trying to figure out how we're going to get done all the things that we'd like to. Starting out with compensation and benefits. Again, compensation, as we often tell you all, is the largest chunk of our budget, and that's because we have a service organization, and those services require people to deliver them. So I'm going to start with just kind of what it's going to cost to sort of keep the status quo, keep doing what we're doing. And the first thing, and this is all focused on our general fund, is making sure that we have that full year cost of the mid-year adjustments that we did in the current year. So just as a reminder, those mid-year adjustments include some incentives for recruitment and retention in the police department, as well as moving our minimum salary up to $36,816 a year, and some associated compression adjustments for other employees. We also have an increase in the employer contribution to the state retirement system that we think is around $550,000 impact in the general fund. And then, as we mentioned, I think a couple times before, we're seeing our health costs increase. So we're looking at a $1 to $1.5 million increase on the employer contribution to our healthcare fund. And then we're also evaluating both our plan design and our employee contribution for healthcare costs. And of course, as we're looking at that, that will be impacted by what we do on the compensation side. We want to make sure that whatever we do on compensation is not going to get eaten up by anything that we do on the plan design or employee contribution side. So what are we looking at? And again, we showed you a similar list, I believe, at the retreat. First and foremost, the Just Economics pledge living wage. We'll get a little bit more into that in a moment. Differential salary increases. What that means is we may be looking at salary increases that are not kind of across the board. We're really trying to make sure with both of those items and really the rest of the list that we're targeting departments where we have the most significant challenges with recruitment and retention. So again, trying to be strategic about how we deploy these things that we're considering to make sure that we're able to hire and retain staff. So looking at what is that going to cost? Just again, round numbers, each 1% increase in pay cost approximately $175,000 for just the police department, and then about $575,000 for other general fund departments. So increasing the current minimum salary from that $36,816 to the Just Economics living wage of $41,808 would be a 13.5% increase, which is
Also known as 10 million?
so. And what that represents is, we really don't want to undo those compression adjustments that we just did in November.
Yeah.
So if we were to sort of implement that across the organization, it's an over $10 million impact in the general fund.
I was hoping that bullet was accidentally slid over. But wow, okay. Wow.
So some other things that we look at as we're trying to decide on what where we should be at on the compensation side. One, of course, is inflation, the primary measure of inflation being the consumer price index. For January, and this is the national urban or U.S. cities average, the January number was 6.4 headline and 5.6% core inflation, so that's over a 12-month period. The core takes out food and energy costs, which can be volatile. We actually just got this morning, the February numbers were released, and the U.S. city average, the headline number was 6%, the core number is 5.5%. So still kind of around that 6% range. It is a little bit higher for the South over the national average, but again, I think we've seen somewhere in that neighborhood over the last several months, again, somewhere around 6%. We did reach out to some other local governments in the state, both counties and municipalities. It's a little hard to compare, and everyone's a little cagey right now about exactly what they're going to be recommending because they're at the same place in their budget development processes that we are, of course. But kind of looking broadly at what people are doing collectively around cost of living adjustments, merit adjustments, and market adjustments, I think kind of the floor there that we heard from other folks was around 3%. So that's kind of the bottom end of what folks are considering. And we also wanted to let you all know that we did have a request specifically from the police department for a 6% increase. So where we think we need to be right now is considering an increase somewhere between 3.5% and 5%. A 3.5% increase would get us not to that Just Economics living wage number, but they did have what they called, I believe, a pledged living wage rate, and I will read to you directly from their website. That is rate with a pledge to increase wages yearly at a rate of 3% plus annual inflation until reaching the living wage rate. So a 3.5% increase would get us over that lower pledged living wage rate at an additional cost of approximately $2.75 million, and that's total for the general fund. So to wrap up on the compensation side, I think what we would like today is to make sure that you all don't have any concerns about any of the items that we are considering, especially those first two, the Just Economics pledged living wage rate, and then those differential salary increases, specifically looking at that 6% request from the police department. And I will also say, of course, really those two pieces being the main parts, but all of this collectively will certainly inform kind of our capacity to do other things on this list, but also fund additional new requests that we have from departments.
And the total, so right now, let me make sure I'm reading and listening correctly. The top two bullets come to a total of what? That's the 2.75?
So 2.75 would be just the 3.5%
Okay.
for everyone. So it will be more than that, more than 2.75.
And there's a lot of analysis to get there. And so that's, okay, great. So this is that
Yeah,
step
we'll
to
certainly bring
signal.
more specific numbers. We're just trying to get
But
some
as it
ballpark
compares
right
to
now.
like 10 million, we're thinking it's more like 5? I mean, we don't really know. Because of compression or what? Or is the 2.75 including the compression that we roll out?
Yeah, so that would be a
Okay.
3.5% straight across the board increase for all employees.
I have two things in mind right now, and one is a question. One is that I'm reminded every single time we lag on living wages that we're behind the cost of living. But my question is, when we were at the retreat, we also talked about the vacancies in public works and the importance of recruiting and retaining across departments that are struggling to hire. But I didn't see that reflected today. So if we are still looking at a plan for recruiting and retaining staff, are we talking about public works too?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So I think that would be really looking at the kind of the other bullets other than the first two. And again, that's where that targeting places where we're seeing significant challenges in recruitment and retention. So one example is, making sure that we're, being able to provide a career ladder for current employees so that they know how they can kind of progress, get certification, get additional skills, and have some additional compensation as a result of that. So we're looking at things like that. And again, hiring bonuses, not just for APD, but across the organization, again, in those targeted areas where we know we have needs.
And part of the differential salary increases may also include public works. We wanted to highlight APD because there has been a whole lot of attention, and that was actually a specific request. And we wanted to, for full disclosure, let you all know that there was a different request in terms of an adjustment for this particular department. And this would be kind of out of the ordinary for us. We generally don't distinguish and do differential pay, but we know that we have differential challenges in terms of retention and recruitment. So we've got to do something different. This cannot be business as usual.
And I just know we were also having conversations about sanitation and facilities and maintenance and so many things that I didn't see public works named, which is why I wanted to make sure it's explicit.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
And so we just, we want to make sure that you all are comfortable with those two bolded items, because again, that sets a huge base for us to continue working on those. Not asking you for a decision necessarily, but just you're comfortable with us continuing to work, and we'll provide you with more detailed information. I just didn't want staff to go through all of this work without you all being somewhat comfortable.
Well, will you
Going
back
forward.
up one slide to, Deborah, are you saying, are we comfortable with the range, the 3.5 to 5? Do you need us to gel that up a little more for you?
Not necessarily, unless you're wanting to. We thought it might be a little too early for that request. Those two items we bolded is where we really need some direction and concurrence, we hope.
Okay, so, well, I think we recognize that we need to be aggressive around
We've
staff.
got to.
Salary increases. So so to the extent that you need direction on this one, I'm leaning higher, and on the next one.
Great.
I definitely support the APD piece. I think my concern with the pledge on the living wage, I guess I kind of want to understand where that'll really end up putting us and how short we're going to fall. I want to try to get as close, personally, I want to try to get as close as we possibly can. I understand money is not intention or want or desire to support our employees, but that money is the issue. So maybe we're going to flesh those numbers out a little bit more, so we'll.
So the pledge amount would get us to 18, what was the number? That Just Economics said that could be an option for
And this is
municipalities.
this mirrors what the county did.
Generally,
So, as we've done in previous years, we've been able to calculate how many employees would fall below that living wage and kind of whether they're seasonal, temp workers, who are we talking about when we're talking about employees who aren't going to reach that, and help us really make a decision about whether we just pledge or we go for it.
So can you go back a few more
I mean, and that, you may not
slides
have
for
that information.
Well, that 10 million, because what we're looking at is, you all were generous enough to approve resources for us to address compression. Every time we move that bottom layer of salaries in our organization, it has a ripple effect. And we're suggesting we not undo what we just were able to do with the with the compression adjustments.
So what would so it's $10 million impact if you jump right to
The 2010. I
But
think it's
if we,
2010.
but if we put in 5% across the board plus 6% per APD, then do we know what that number looks like? Adjusting
like-
for compression as well, like, I mean, is that 8.5 million, you know what I'm saying?
Got it, okay.
Yeah, same question. I
Yeah,
had,
so,
yeah.
so I just, sorry, want to clarify one thing. If we do an across-the-board adjustment, that should maintain our current structure.
Compression, right.
If we, so I think, Mayor, you asked a question about how many employees are impacted. So we do have about 150 employees that are under that 41,808 right now. That's employees. So what we would strongly prefer to not do is shift all of those people up to 41,808.
Right, because that creates the compression problem.
Right. So if we are able to do an across-the-board increase, that, basically makes that not a factor because everyone's shifting by a similar percentage, so you're maintaining those.
So I guess the question would be, let's say you did 5% across the board, how many are left below that number, the 41,808? And what's the fiscal impact of it? You have right there 1%, it says other general fund, I assume that's 1% salary increase across the board is 575.
Well, we know APD's asking for 6%, so that would
That's
be
correct.
1.05 million, because that's 175 per 1%. And I thought can you go to the next slide? Sorry. So then 3.5% raise would equal 2.75 million. And that's just flat, right? That's what I was asking earlier. There isn't any compression to deal with in that scenario.
Correct.
But then if you wanted to go to
I'm having trouble with the
5,
math though, because if you
well
go
then
back,
here, it's.
and you said it's only
1.7.
575.
So that's
I need that slide.
3.5% for everyone, including APD, just 3.5%.
Times
This is
0.05.
very confusing. These slides need like little notes when we post them.
Or a
Because it's
side-by-side
really
comparison.
575 plus
Okay, so then
175 times 5
2.75
plus
minus the
another
1.05
1%.
equals 1.6
Or
Which is, I think,
million
to the manager's earlier
equals-
point,
Or
I don't think we need a
5%.
specific percentage from you all, but are we in the ballpark?
Well,
Well, I think what we're trying to get to
48,
is like, it's hard to say, yes, those are
480,000
strategies
per
we want, because
percent times
we're
5.
struggling to
So
figure
it's
out what
240
ballpark of dollars we're in
million.
as we're trying to
Plus,
piece it
so
across the
that's
slide,
2.75,
so.
5.1.
I think
Yes.
what I'd want to see is what does it look like for 5% across the board plus, but APD at 6% and
It looks like about 5 million, but yeah.
and then see
Yeah,
who's
that's what I'm
left
seeing, too.
below.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question, because this has come up in the past. Does this include our firefighters? Okay.
I assume that's all
That's
employees.
all
In the
employees.
all general
Everybody,
fund is
all
everybody.
1,200.
It's just, in the past,
Okay,
we've
so
talked
that's
about living
5.1
wages
million.
except, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't have people falling through the cracks.
Oh, you mean the way
No,
that,
no,
no,
that wouldn't be.
this is, theirs
They
is
have
based
their
on an annual, not an hourly, but that, to your point, yes.
I just want to confirm this includes our firefighters.
Well, it includes the firefighters the way the city calculates their annual salary. So, right, so it would be,
So in a 3.5 or 5% adjustment, this would include the firefighters, but it would not be changing the way we currently have salary
Of a
firefighters
base
towards the
annual
living
salary
wage.
for a firefighter.
Right, so I just would want to know if the Buncombe County, like, if we're going to be underneath Buncombe County on certain pay grades or certain positions, we want to be an employer of choice, we want to retain good people. Then I want to just make sure that if we're having a differential salary set, that we're also looking at that while we're looking at whether or not we're going to do the pledge or not.
yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't really reopen that issue if you do an across-the-board increase. It was where we
Yeah.
were we were bringing up the lowest paid, that's where we've run into that.
But that's not nearly as scary. If we could do the 6% for APD and the 5% across the board, and it's around 5.25, somewhere in that, that's not as bad.
Yeah, there are going to be additional, in addition to the 6% for APD, there's going to be additional salary-related requests to support APD.
And
Oh,
some of those are
outside the
on
wage.
On this list, like certification, incentive
Mhm.
pay,
Yeah.
that will be a
Those
cost.
have financial.
Night shift differential, on-call pay, all of that will be a cost.
And when will we
But the
make,
bulk of it is those two
when might we
things.
expect numbers around some of those?
We can bring that back at the next work session. You have a work session on the 28th?
Correct.
And we can defer possibly capital. It shouldn't take that much for capital.
I know that this is technically a question from earlier, but I'm trying to think about when we want our staff to be able to serve in the community where they live. And it came up in our retreat, but we didn't like flesh it out because I thought we would talk about it later, and this is the later. Are we gonna continue doing the property tax mitigation recommendation? Was the fund fully used last year? Were the requests beyond the capacity? Like, when would we expect a conversation about that?
Yeah, could I ask Tony to come up?
So we actually have not gotten any of the data yet from Buncombe County in terms of the usage for the most recent calendar year. For the prior calendar year, we were surprised, I think, at how many people did utilize that. I think it was one of the highest utilized programs like that in the state. But it still did not, we had $150,000 in the budget. We had money left over from that. So we do think we can fund the existing program again next year within the dollars we have.
Okay. It would help me to have a better picture of that, because what I hear us saying is like, we're in a good position at a time when our community isn't in a good position. And there's a lot of fear around like economic instability. So I think that would help me understand how we prioritize this and also the cost of living for the same people, including our staff.
But not us.
Yeah, I did the math on my hours last year. I made, what was it, $5.17 an
Yeah,
hour.
it's not a living wage. that's for
That
sure.
what, that we,
That,
Should we
we-
put out a tip
oh,
jar?
our hourly wage?
Hourly wage.
Oh,
I think we get plenty of tips.
you
in
kept
our
track
inbox.
of that, wow.
My husband gets paid worse for coaching, but other than
Do we have any other comments on
that.
compensation and benefits before we move to other investments?
And if we could just conclude it, I think what you all are asking for from us is to bring back specific costs. If we almost provided you a recommendation of, here's what we think we're going to need to be competitive, particularly related to our, I want to call them, I will say our most challenging departments, which may be a little different. That'll be a package, and then for the rest of the base employees, bring that back with costs and I think you want us to make a distinction between the numbers related to getting to the full living wage and
5%.
then the pledge.
And the 5% is what
And-
I heard.
and the
Not
5%,
just 3.5,
yes.
yeah. Did I hear that right? 5%?
I just want to make sure
Yeah.
we had the
For,
follow-up.
for an opportunity to educate the public while we educate ourselves, we have multiple different documents about the vacancies that are, and that they're already becoming outdated. But at least if we could get a picture alongside that of
Absolutely.
like which
Right.
departments we are talking about and why we're talking about them. Part of the reason for asking this is when we do come back in a year and say, hey, did this work?
Got
Then
it.
we could say like, there's a metric that we're looking at this beside.
And a little similar on that, because we normally end up looking at the APD structure as if it's fully staffed and then subtracting some kind of vacancy rate. But we look at the big number, right? Like the whole, as if it were fully staffed. So when we look at 6%, it'll be across that. So I'll really be curious what kind of vacancy we're betting on for next. I mean, I don't know who can weigh in on that or how, but if we have
Yeah,
any.
We think the chief can because
Okay.
of training.
Yeah, the
and-
training
Yeah.
schedule.
Yeah.
And then if, yeah, okay.
And we've had some preliminary discussions with the chief, and I would say right now, it looks like probably will be similar from a budgeted vacancies to what we did this year.
Well, and one thing I don't really see on this list of things we might do to better service those really challenged departments, use your words, is the idea of an internal police cadet school. And I'm imagining it just looks and costs something to even look into it. I just didn't know if that's something we might.
It's not here yet because it's
It's so long.
preliminary,
Yeah,
but
money to look into it is what I'm wondering.
So
Wow.
an assessment or an analysis or
Well,
study
I mean,
of it.
we're so short-staffed, who would do it? Will it just fall to the wayside because we didn't think about it?
yeah, I think we're gonna need to have we just had a conversation with the chief briefly about it. There's some internal capacity issues around, even if you can ramp up the number of classes, the internal training piece that always has to happen, there's that might create a backlog there until they're more staffed. And I know AB Tech wants to have a conversation about what our needs are before we
Oh, good.
pull out from
Okay.
over there. So I think there's a few conversations that need to happen before we're ready to say, let's go.
Well, and maybe what you're doing is accounting for some kind of unknown idea that might surface, right? Like somewhere in here.
Yes, and we are relying heavily on what the chief is noticing, throughout North Carolina and from his experience
Okay.
of, where he is with recruitment, or how best to recruit. And, we're trying everything that we can. But as the chief has said, it takes time to train police officers. And we want the best and the brightest. So I appreciate it, and we just wanted to make sure we had the right follow-up information to have the conversation on the 28th at our work session. All right.
All right, so, and I will say, caveat this with, this is not an all inclusive list, but we did want to bring some examples of operating requests that we've received from departments. Those first two we noted as one time, so again, opportunities to utilize whether it's ARPA or fund balance or another one-time source to fund downtown design guidelines or the next phase of planning for Pack Square Plaza, which would get us a little more into the design. We have some requests around the coordination within the city for the Americans with Disabilities Act, making sure we're compliant with that, redevelopment and planning support, some kind of basic services with streets, sanitation, traffic engineering, staffing. I think we mentioned these last three at the bottom were kind of cross-departmental needs that were identified by several departments where they could use some additional support with grant coordination, capital asset management, facilities, grounds, and parks maintenance. So again, we'll bring back some more details on those items. Just again, as an example, I think we had around 78 total positions that were requested, so that is not a full list. but just some examples of things that we're looking at. So we did also want to hit very quickly on our enterprise funds. We shared some of this information with the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee. I think I got those in the right order. This morning around fee adjustments, but wanted to make sure that you all were aware of some of the other things we're looking at in our enterprise funds. For water, we are still making up for the loss of that capital fee from FY20. Their fee increase that we are recommending would help support that, as well as provide some additional staffing for communications, additional maintenance, some billing support as we work through that meter replacement project, and some staffing and engineering around plant maintenance. For parking, again, we've shared some information throughout the current fiscal year. For parking, current year revenues looked to be performing as we would expect and in line with their budget, which is a good thing. Right now, we're forecasting that their revenues are going to be pretty in line with where they're at in the current year. We also have a facility assessment that is underway that will help inform future needs, especially as it relates to maintenance needs in the parking garages. But right now, we have no service changes planned in the parking fund.
May I ask a question about that one?
Sure.
Would it be possible to see how we're doing on parking incomes as compared to pre-COVID? Like how we're,
Absolutely. And that's actually what we've been doing in
Okay.
terms of comparisons.
Yeah, and I would say they're certainly getting much closer to that than they have been in the prior few years. On transit, we have some one-time opportunities. There is just the cost of existing service, which increases annually through the management contract. It's around $400,000. One of the one-time opportunities that management contract expires in 2025. We'd like to get a consultant to help us develop the RFP and do the solicitation, which is what we did last time. We think that would cost around $100,000. We're looking at the city-county master plan to determine service delivery and a long-term funding strategy at a cost of $300,000. We are also considering a missions plan that may run alongside that master planning process. And then we did want to mention that primarily based on the current situation with staffing and the bus fleet, we do not believe that we have the ability to execute on those previously planned service enhancements from a couple of fiscal years ago. And again, that's just primarily based off of where the transit service finds itself currently.
So with that, here's where we currently are in our service. In the past, we had wanted to go here. What you're saying is we're going to stay flat in our service. We're not going to regress further, is how you're looking at it currently?
I would say, hopefully, assuming that we don't find ourselves in a situation like we did earlier this fiscal year and prior, where we were so short on bus drivers that we had to do some temporary service cuts.
And there were service cuts due to lack of drivers as recently as this week that impacted my commute, so I know it impacted others. I noticed that we're using interchangeable language, city-county master plan feasibility study. I'd love to be on the same sheet of music around this. So are we looking at a whole new master plan when we have an existing master plan that we haven't gotten to phase 3 on? Or are we really looking at studying the city-county relationship for transit? Because the master plan, I would expect, would have a much bigger price tag on it.
So we've done a little bit of testing, and we think that figure is accurate. Also, we are looking at a kind of a service delivery plan if we went countywide with transit. And obviously, we are looking at our existing, for the city, master plan, and then incorporating them such that there is one plan, not this big countywide feasibility study or plan, and then we have a separate city plan. We're trying to.
So instead of talking
Incorporate
about
both.
two different things, we're now talking about a city-county master plan that would incorporate our current city master plan information,
Absolutely.
not a feasibility study.
That is my understanding. I'm looking out at the staff here. That's what, Rachel?
On the dollar amount is that the county's
Okay.
Okay.
That was
Right,
my
so it is a
question.
much bigger price tag to do it.
It's 600,000
Thank you.
total, but 300,000 for us.
Great.
Okay, and then what I didn't, well, go ahead. Never mind.
Any other questions on transit or comments before I move on?
I guess just want to echo what Kim's bringing up. I would love us to like get the bullets of what this will be in writing, because I'm still unclear of what will be the major components, and I think the conversation's evolving, and I think that's okay. But there's a lot of need, and
So city and county staff are working on that scope of work. A draft of the scope of work does list out kind of that bulleted summary of what the plan will entail. We've got another follow-up meeting with county staff scheduled for later this month. We're also going to start some stakeholder engagement, starting with MMTC, I believe, on
Great.
March 20th.
transit
But as soon
committee.
as we have something to a place where the city and county staff are in agreement, we are 100% planning on bringing that forward to a future agenda briefing to have more detailed conversations with this body.
And, you know, perhaps stopping at PED on the earlier side so that we could help with some of the, there's such a big need for the strategy behind this, and I think that there's a lot of policy overlap in strategy here.
I have a question about the master plan. There've been some conversations with the city and county about providing coverage for our students in the county. I'm wondering if someone from the county is representing that voice and that the
I
coverage.
feel
footprint.
fairly confident that if they are, we are.
Thanks.
All right, so moving on to stormwater. We are in the middle of a consultant-led service review for the stormwater service. They've helped us, or that has informed the additional service enhancements that would be funded by the fee change should it be approved by you all. Those include some additional maintenance, staffing for construction inspections. I think this piece is really key, system mapping, which will really help us identify where we have needs in our existing system, and then some vehicle and equipment purchases. So to wrap up on the operating side, again, those compensation decisions are going to be the biggest piece of the puzzle and will determine our capacity to fund additional requests. We have those strategic, our opportunities to strategically invest one-time revenues to support some of those operating requests, and then the fee changes, if approved, will help support service enhancements, especially for our enterprise funds. And those fee changes will be coming to council at your next meeting.
28.
Any questions before I shift over to capital?
I would love to know, I mean, at some point, we must have a line item for what we are rebating for the Louise annually. Do we ever pull that, could we, at some future date, pull that number?
Sure, we can provide that, absolutely.
Ladies, instead of Grant. I have a question before we move on to capital. And I didn't see another place for this question to go. In our breakout work group at the retreat, we talked about how the county has woven in growth percentage for the reparations fund. And since we were meant to match it, like, are we gonna do that with the compounding interest is what we talked about, but we haven't talked about it as a full council yet. And I don't see that here, but are we looking at that as well?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes, we are.
I think I'd like to know what the county's doing in terms of, I don't know that we have other static line items in our budget that we have tied to a growth percentage, but I wonder that as well. I know, I'm trying to think of, like affordable housing has a $500,000 capital allocation.
That has been, static.
Yeah,
$500,000.
so I'm just curious if we have any other that we've tied a automatic growth number to. I'm glad to look at it, I think.
I think the other example I've been able to think of is that our general fund balance is tied to a percentage of growth, but that's a huge other fund.
Yeah, I mean,
that's mandated,
that's, yeah, well, it's not mandated, but it's
We have a
Essentially
policy of
mandated,
here's
yeah.
where we
There's
want
a
to be.
state mandated one, but we also have an internal policy. It's both, right?
It's both. And then our enterprise funds have their own fund balance.
Yeah,
Like
and those are
8%.
mandated at 8%,
Yeah.
I think.
I think that's policy as well. The only thing that I can think of off the top of my head, and I'm gonna look back at Tony and see if he has any other ideas, but is our capital contribution. We do grow that by the same percentage as our property tax base growth.
But then there was a
Well,
request to do.
Because it's tied to a number. It's not, it's so, I forget what it was, 2.3 cents or whatever it is.
Yes.
It's so that when
pennies on the
that
dollar.
number nets a larger amount every year, so, yes, I get it, yeah.
And I thought the counties was 2%.
I believe it was
for
2 or 3, but
reparation.
we'll find out.
Yeah, so it's a different way to tie it.
Yeah.
2% of their,
General fund?
Yes.
I assume they're general fund.
Just an increase of 2%.
I think it was
thought.
just a 2% increase, right?
Oh, of whatever, 500
Of their 500.
grows
Yeah,
by
whatever that
2%.
raise, right. Yeah.
I see, okay. Maybe we'll know that,
By.
we'll find out, yeah.
So I actually only have one high-level slide on capital, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris Coral. But we did want to just briefly mention, and again, I think this is hopefully a little bit of a refresher, but our current CIP does primarily consist of maintenance projects, and we really have limited capacity to add projects or costs outside of that plan without some existing resources dedicated to our capital program. We have some significant needs and additions that have already been identified. The two, other than the one we are about to discuss at length that we have brought to you all, are the municipal building and your recent decision on the I-26 project. But really our critical path as it relates to capital in the current year is decision on McCormick Field. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Coral.
wait, there
Yeah.
was a work session recently, I'm sorry, maybe it was like PED or something, but it was, what did we see? That we give about 15, we set aside 15 million a year for CIP, and that we thought to get on better track, we needed another 5 million? Was that what I remember from, you must have presented it. To get to the place we wanted to be, is what it was. Is that right?
I mean, I'll just say that as much as you all are interested in dedicating to capital, we could probably use, to be frank.
But I guess I thought that was a slide, like a particular number is starting. I'll look back. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Remember that one.
Good afternoon. Hi, Chris Coral, Community and Regional Entertainment Facilities Director. You missed one word.
I feel like you're trying to remember it.
I am, it's true. All right, so we'll talk about McCormick Field. A lot of this you've seen before, but we're putting it back up so you can see the little things that have changed since last month in our discussions with the team. So key takeaways on the stadium. It's an important regional asset currently owned by us that over the years has not been adequately invested in. It's leased out primarily for minor league baseball to the Asheville tourists. The facility should and could be used for other purposes, like we've discussed with other community events. And the funding plan to put this project together, if we were to do so, would require the team, the county, the TDA, and possibly, hopefully, the state. And to retain Major League Baseball affiliation in Asheville, we're going to have to be able to submit a funding plan and a commitment to Major League Baseball by April 1st, so at the end of this month. And there'll be a request for a vote for approval of a commitment at the business meeting this afternoon. So to give you an idea of the project, you haven't seen this before, you've seen the two projects side by side, but this is just an idea of the buckets that are within that 37.5 million. Some home clubhouse, batting tunnels, weight rooms, clubhouse conversions. The current home would become the visitors. Potable water in some places, because believe it or not, we don't have that in some areas of that stadium. Scoreboard video displays and their structures, video surveillance systems, new suites and press box areas to meet player development standards, LED sport lighting, a batter's eye, which is the dark area behind the pitcher so the batter can see the ball, concourse expansion, and some deferred maintenance and upkeep, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, etc. So we came to you on February 14th, and the main points we heard from council was a request for community engagement, request for more information related to non-baseball events, and to further explore the financial model and to seek additional inputs to the project while limiting impact on the current CIP. So we'll start with community engagement. We have met with the Oakhurst and East End communities in the last couple weeks. 3 big highlights, fourth pseudo highlight that we'll talk about as well, but parking and traffic was the by far #1 concern I would say that we heard. And there was a request from the neighborhoods to do more and better traffic management, and not just with baseball games. In fact, we clearly heard that baseball games are actually done pretty well on the Oakhurst side, need some work on the East End side, but that most of the issues that the neighborhood runs into are events at Memorial Stadium. So they were really concerned about non-baseball events and what that parking and traffic would be. Expanding traffic management to the north side, which is the East End, and there was a clear desire for the team to operate that future traffic plan instead of the city. And an enforcement support request of the city to go and actually ticket illegal parking and things like that, which is not an area that we currently enforce. Noise was another concern. Fireworks, the request was to not allow any additional nights of fireworks, to ensure that the fireworks are shot earlier than previously shot in the past, and try to limit the other loud events, i.e. concerts, to abide by the noise ordinance and try to limit that quantity. I feel like we heard roughly 10 to 15. I think 12 is probably a sweet spot number for that in the future. And communication and notification. So the team runs a text alert program for fireworks, so you can sign up for it. You get a text roughly 5 minutes before. I think the morning of the show, you get a text, and then you get another one 5 minutes before the fireworks are shot to give you a heads up. The big question was, where's the one-stop shop for everything that's happening at Memorial, McCormick, and that doesn't exist currently, so trying to find a way to program that on the city's website that has all McCormick games, Memorial programming, any non-baseball McCormick aspects, and then how do we send that out and make sure the neighborhood hears about it. So with that, we've worked with the club and have some slight deal point adjustments related to those concerns. The club has agreed to manage all McCormick events as far as parking and traffic goes. We're still in talks for Memorial, but they're open to it, but we have to make sure that we're able to cover their costs that are associated with that. We're figuring out what those costs would be and if parks can bear that, because most of those programs are parks programs up at Memorial. And additional support from the city. We don't really know what that looks like or what that can be, but we know that on the staff side, we're open to that and trying to find a way to help with that enforcement. Noise and fireworks. So the teams revoked their requests for additional fireworks nights, and they've amended their request to allow for back-to-back nights to apply only on July 4th, when July 4th falls on a Saturday, which only happens 3 times in the next 20 years, which is 2026, 2037, and 2043. And the team went back and looked at their fireworks start times last year, which was the first year of the new pitch clock in minor league baseball, and they started their games 30 minutes earlier, so the new, if you will, average shoot time was 9:26 p.m., whereas in the past it was closer to 11 p.m., so they're definitely shooting a lot earlier now. And the teams also agreed to utilize and expand that text email notification process outside of just fireworks. We, city, will still have to figure out that one-stop shop online, but they can help push the information out. And it would still be an opt-in, so we wouldn't be hitting everybody in that area unless you asked for it. Any questions on the community side before I move on?
I had 2 pretty big questions come up this week from proximal neighbors that I hadn't considered the same way they presented them. One is, can we get a revisit on the Hunt Hill facility timeline changes? I think that would help folks who are watching this conversation.
Sure, and you're talking about parking rec maintenance facility moving out?
And
Yes.
future use.
Yes, we will provide that to you in the next 30 days.
Okay.
We do know, though, that I think March the 31st is the last day for park and rec to be at the Hunt Hill location.
Okay. And then the second one, and this I think is fair, is a concern around contracting, that folks want to trust that when we have a new contract like this, it's so important and a long-term contract that we're gonna uphold it. And that if we had a really great track record of when we see contracts failing, we do something about it early and efficiently, but there's not that trust right now. So what are some of the metrics that make sure that we make sure that the contract is being met, and what happens if it doesn't get met?
We need Brad in here to hear that.
And are you meaning the contracts around some of the things that the community is interested in, or the contract at large with all the deal points?
Probably some of both. I just think about like, one of the ways that it was presented was, what happens if something happens to minor league baseball and there's a huge recession and there's just not the money for it, and there's there's not the bailout at the state level to like help save baseball. A lot of our emails say save baseball. We can't do that, but we can make a contract about the use of the facility. And what happens if, as a baseball fan, I hope that doesn't happen, but I would love for us to know that we have a plan in place for addressing the contract if for some reason the agreement has failed.
So that's a very good point. And so I raised this earlier, and Chris has talked to the team, and we have asked for them to guarantee their financial commitment over the period of time. I believe it's going to be a 20-year period of time. So that if any of these things happen, that you're talking about, they would still perform under the contract. And specifically, we need a guarantee from an entity that has the fiscal means to guarantee this, because obviously, if you have a contract just with the baseball organization and the baseball organization folds and is assetless, it cannot perform under the contract. But we can require that they have a guarantor that is funded to
So
be
who is
able. We've asked them to come up. They have, as you know, other companies that are have assets that they may be able to put forward, and they have agreed to that. I think Brian's here. He can speak to the details of that. But I agree. I think that should be a primary concern. How do we know? We know the city can perform. We know the county can perform. But if something were to happen to the team, if it's sold, if it folds, if it moves, how do we know that the investment will be there in partnership with us for the 20-year period?
And we do know that there would be a grantor. I don't have the name of the entity yet. I don't know if we know that yet, do we?
And I mean, I think those will be the kinds of things that our very skilled attorney will have to nail down and make airtight, that there is a guarantor that they can verify would be able to support the commitment, the financial commitment made.
Thanks for bringing that up. Another layer of that, these deal points on this slide, do these go into the contract?
Yes. And
Great.
And all the other ones from that February work session where we had, I think, 4 or 5 slides worth of deal points, those would all be in there with a little more detail than just the bullets.
Great. And I'm talking to neighbors in the neighborhood over the weekend. There was kind of ambiguity of like gratitude for the relationship with the tourists already, feeling like there was a real willingness to work together, and feeling like that flexibility was noted. And then they were kind of like, but if Brian leaves, what does that mean? And so what I'm hearing is that this will be part of the contract.
Yes.
Thanks for that assurance.
And that reminded me, the fourth not major point that the neighborhood brought up that is also significant was just pedestrian safety, specifically in Oakhurst. There's not really great sidewalks, and in a lot of cases there are not sidewalks, and that we felt like that's a much bigger conversation than just the McCormick Field project. But when you have more events going on there, you have more traffic, more pedestrians. But that's something we'll have to work through as well over time.
In the tour I had of the facility, thank you for that, it became really clear to me why the bathrooms are such a big issue, and why minor league would require that at a minimum we address the bathrooms in proximity to where food is being prepared and getting those up to code. But I wonder if we're missing an opportunity here. If it's not asking for more money, and it's the same difference to say we're gonna have bathrooms that female identifying people can use, or we can have family and gender inclusive bathrooms. If it's just a single user stall or a non-urinal facility, then why not just go ahead and make it for the long haul usable for anyone who needs to use the bathroom? And so if it's not an additional cost, I wonder if we can add gender inclusive facilities instead of just female facilities.
I think we could look at that in the design at this point. It hasn't been designed. I do know just from how we have to do our leases at the Harris Center to have our one gender-neutral restroom, there's some language from HB2 that we have to be careful with.
Family.
Yeah.
Family
is the
bathroom.
key, yeah.
And you can't actually submit documents with those alternative, non-allowed items.
Yeah.
Right, so can we
But then you take them
make sure
down
that
and-
families have access to the bathrooms at McCormick Field?
I would think so.
Yeah.
There is currently, I believe, yes.
But not for the
Yeah.
But
staff,
not, yeah,
not for
you're
the
saying,
staff, not for the umps, not for the
Oh.
team.
you're talking behind the scenes
The ones
facilities.
that-
I got you.
Not the user experience, but in addition to the user experience.
Interesting.
All right. So current and future facility usage. We've had some questions about the breakdown of where people come from to attend tourist games. So just for clarity, this is from the economic impact report that was completed about 10, 11 months ago, I guess it was at this point. So attendees to tourist games only, this doesn't count anything else that would be happening there. But Buncombe County, not including Asheville City residents, about 29% of their attendance. Asheville residents, 23%. Not in North Carolina, 16, and so on down the line. So you can see it's heavily used by locals when you look at the other surrounding counties. This is more of a locals first as opposed to a tourist first facility.
Clearly, we should go to Henderson County and ask them to help us out. No.
So another way to look at those numbers is 75% of the visitors are from here,
Yep,
whether it's Asheville, Buncombe, or our neighboring counties.
yes.
And, I mean, you run our community regional event facilities or what have you.
Yeah.
How, my guess is that's pretty unique to some of our other facilities.
So I just asked the Nature Center manager this today, just to make sure I knew. So about 25% of the attendees at the Nature Center are from the city of Asheville, and everywhere else it's outside of city of Asheville. At the Harris Center, it's about 80% out-of-market visitors compared to locals. Aston Park Tennis Center, which is a little different because it's more of a recreational, but it's about 90% local. So this is unique in that it's an entertainment and it's so heavily locally used.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right now, it's only baseball,
Yes.
and it's looking at more.
Therein is the opportunity with the hotel tax, and that there's an open opportunity to bring more tourists to that facility without affecting locals.
The irony cannot, I can't pass it up, that our tourist facility is one of our most local facilities. It's just beautiful.
I would have supported a name change.
I can't believe
The locals.
I know, I've heard this
I know.
request for a name change. I think that it's been the tourist for a long,
Wow.
long time.
Yeah.
Okay, so funding plan. This is relatively the same as what you saw last time. The team has agreed to adjust the extra $1 per paid attendee over 175,000 starting in year 1 post renovation instead of year 11. All other points remain the same. We also stepped up the non-baseball attendance minimum, keeping the same 35,000 for the first 10 years, jumping that up to 40,000 in years 11 through 20 with a 50% penalty for every attendee if the target's missed. And a slight adjustment down about 2 million on the capital investment request. So the annual investment of 75 from the team, 25 from the city, staying the same, but a $2 million request in year 5 and a $4 million capital investment request in year 15. Just under the theory that around year 5 is right near that 2030, depending on when we actually get the construction project finished. So 2030 is when all the minor league licenses end. So it's likely that there might be some small changes to the facility requirements. So we should plan ahead and to know that there's money available to make some adjustments, whether it's more netting or thicker pads or whatever it might be. And then when we're in year 15, we're theoretically 4 or 5 years from the end of our lease, maybe a different team ownership, who knows what, but needing to prepare for whatever the next step is for that facility. So an additional exploration of funding opportunities. So state funding, and to be super, super clear, no bill introduced, not in the budget yet. We have no idea if this will happen. But we're hearing of a potential of a $30 million pot in the minor league baseball infrastructure grant program. This was introduced last year as a $20 million pot and did not pass, just to be clear. It would be $28 million for affiliated stadiums, which ours is one of, and a $2 million allocation for non-affiliated stadiums. 20% maximum budgeted, or maximum award for any single project, and requires likely a 1-to-1 match. So when you take out the administrative fees to the Department of Commerce and everything, the maximum that we would potentially be able to get from this grant is $5.4 million as a one-time grant.
With this one, I see and understand in red, no bill introduced, there's a lot,
Is the idea that it would
this is-
just be lumped into the budget?
Yeah.
So the budget's being cooked?
right, so it'll be
Yes.
this spring. The question I have is, and you might not know this, but say this moves through, there's $30 million available, how many stadiums would be competing for this?
There's 10 minor league teams in the state. We are by far the worst off out of all of them, however. And it would be, based on demonstrated
You mean
need and merit.
demonstrated the greatest need?
Demonstrated the greatest need, yeah. Let's rewind, start that over again. Our stadium needs the most work. And there's 2 teams that are already publicly announced moving to new stadiums. So there's 2 markets right off the bat that would still have access, but their need would be much less because they're committing to building new stadiums in those markets.
So I was talking to one of the county commissioners about this variable, which we won't know, we just won't know it before the deadline. What impact would it have? Let's say we get the 5.4. Do you have a way to I mean, I guess what I would say is.
You'll see that in just a
Okay.
couple slides, actually.
I have a question about that before we move
Yeah.
on. And mostly it's just putting a spotlight on what you already have written down. If we maintain an affiliated stadium, we have a greater opportunity to pursue this or future iterations of this funding.
Very accurate, yes.
Thank you.
On the city side, we have the opportunity to approve a facility fee on tickets sold at the stadium. So this could bring a potential revenue of between $75,000 and $110,000 per year. This is on baseball tickets only. If we do other non-baseball events, we could also institute the facility fee on those events as well. We recommend this if state funding does not occur. This will help bring our annual costs down. And there's the opportunity to consider utilizing ARPA funding up to $2 million for operational needs in FY24 to free up some fund balance that could be put towards the McCormick Field project. That would be like an upfront down payment on your mortgage to help lessen that annual expense. We could also, with a focus on additional non-baseball.
Sorry, when you say operational needs in FY24, you don't mean baseball operational needs, or do you? You mean
Throughout the city.
city operational
Yeah.
needs?
Yeah, this one's the part that came up on Thursday at our pre-meeting that I'm still struggling with. And I know that if we weren't using it for this, we'd be using it for something else and using that something else funding for this. So to be honest, if we were using it to offset some other operations, it's still coming from the fact that we have $2 million left in ARPA funds to use. And I think that's really hard to sell to a community. I mean, we're getting some emails saying not to do this project at all, but especially when we have really high needs in our community and really high ranked feasibility and equity scores that didn't get addressed. Like we had a ARPA fund application for $375,000 to address public safety at the transit center. And that's not getting done. And so I think that this part of it is like still sticking as an issue for our community and for me.
And we still have 1.3 million left of ARPA, that if we wanted to do additional things, that we could do that. We were just looking at the piece that was specifically designated for city use for operations of utilizing that funding to continue to do that, roll it over into next year. Please don't take it away from us so that we can free up additional revenue to be able to fund and pay for the debt that is needed for this project.
Okay.
And I'll turn to the budget people. Did we? Oh, my goodness, okay.
Okay, so focusing on non-baseball city-owned events with other partner organizations, there's a potential, once we get reopened after a renovation, of $175,000 to $500,000 in annual revenue, depending on total quantity of events, what types of events. what events we own, don't own, partner in, et cetera. So it can be a very wide range. The variables, obviously, weather, neighborhood tolerance, eventually there's a threshold of too much in the programming, right? Competition and parking traffic. So the current estimated funding structure would have the team in at the $468,000 per year for 20 years on average, the county at $250,000 per year for 20 years, the TDA reallocating $1.95 million that we've already been granted for the Cox Avenue project, and separately awarding a $1.4 million per year for 15 years grant under their debt service program. And that would bring the city to $875 per year over 20 years in our worst case scenario. And to show how those different scenarios break out, this is what you were getting to earlier, Mayor. Our starting line's $875 per year. If we institute the facility fee and put $2 million from fund balance in, our annual comes down to $715. If we do the $2 million in fund balance and $1 million from state, that's also $715 because we're taking that facility fee away in that scenario. And then you can see how it stair steps down to a potential as low as $380,000 if we were awarded the maximum possible in the theoretical grant opportunity that comes from the state that is not yet funded.
And this doesn't assume any of the revenue possibilities from the stadium?
Correct.
So I think I'm going to anticipate that if we get state grant money, that the county will want to understand whether they get to share in the reduction of a payment. The county's at about $250,000 right now. So, I think I hope we have the opportunity to negotiate that with the county. But this is helpful in terms of understanding how it could really impact this project significantly for us.
And so for those who are joining the conversation or watching this conversation that weren't watching the one on Thursday, can you talk a little bit about those revenue possibilities? We're talking about programming outside of the baseball season.
Yeah, so we'd be talking about concerts, craft fairs, winter light style events, farmers markets. The team has indicated interest in doing like the $1 movie night on the video board. A lot of minor league baseball teams do that. It can't be free because of weird licensing things, but very affordable, family-friendly events. Tournaments, NCAA or high school baseball tournaments. There's our baseball, but non-baseball in the tour size, right? So it'd be all those different types of events and how they fit in. It could be a really great home for the summer big crafty, for example, that lives in Pack Square Park and has all the challenges of parking and closing roads, but it could just be on a field, for example.
Didn't you estimate that might even be $500,000 a year?
I
So,
feel
It
like
could
you're,
be up to,
So
yeah.
did you just somehow make this
you're
possibly
making
make
money,
money?
now we're making money.
You just.
I mean, in theory,
I mean, if
possibly,
anyone
maybe,
could.
maybe, if we got all of
Yeah.
it. But I think,
If we got the grant.
I would assume that like 3 million roughly is the max that we would get from the
Okay.
state, just to be safe. I mean, there's a lot of other teams out there, and assuming we're gonna get a full 5.4 is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, just looking at the
Right.
numbers you were sharing
Or
today, it would be like 3.3 if each of the 8 teams who are eligible got equal amounts.
Right.
This also makes a really great case for adaptive reuse, because we're saving a lot of money and the environmental impact of not doing what other cities are doing, which is throwing the whole stadium in the trash and starting from scratch. So
That's
it's
a good
both an
point.
environmental and a financial impact that's in our favor to have adaptive reuse as part of this.
Good point.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty great.
Yeah, it could be.
Can we do anything to help support said grant application? Just let
Yeah,
us
we
know.
can talk to all of our legislators and give them
Okay.
a baseball cap.
Yes, please.
We're gonna need 7 baseball.
And so last but not least, the impact of current CIP projects. If we utilize fund balance, there's no effect on currently planned projects. And we have the opportunity to increase CIP contribution incrementally over the next 2 to 3 years, to up the total debt burden of the project, estimated to that maximum of $875 a year. And all currently planned and budgeted projects would move forward as scheduled.
So in that slide you showed us that was highlighted, we talked a couple minutes ago about ARPA funding, and now we're talking fund balance. On this slide, Is there ARPA funding in this?
Yeah, it's the it's the
Is
2
it fund
million in
balance
fund
or-
balance.
It's-
I think to Kim's point, it's
Yeah.
sort of six out, one half dozen or the other, you use this pot, but it's 2 million.
Yeah. It would be using ARPA funding to cover one-time operational to free up fund balance and then use the fund balance for the baseball
We
stadium.
could call it cascading funding.
There you go.
Yeah,
It's-
I remember that
It's
one.
finance departments, like,
Yeah.
moving around things.
The cascading funding is putting out my heartburn a little bit, but I still don't
Yeah.
like the use of ARPA funds for this.
But what,
This also
and why,
bakes, it also bakes in the TDA, shifting the TDA funds we received on Cox to this as well.
That's correct.
That's already an assumption built into this.
Yes.
and part of what I wanted to get at too is, so if you go to the other slide, impact on CIP projects, what you're saying, so at a previous work session, we heard you might need to defer streets or sidewalk projects. What I'm hearing now is that the current deal proposal is that we would not be deferring those capital projects
Yeah, by
If we do
moving
it this
that
way.
by the
fund
cascading
balance, by the
funding.
cascading
Yes.
funding,
Yeah,
we
you
would
have
have the
to-
opportunity not to affect current.
I definitely
projects.
appreciate
Figuring that.
not deferring really needed infrastructure in order to pursue this. I think that's an improvement from what we'd seen in the past.
All right, so we wrap it back up again with the key takeaways and that our goal would be to have approval of a commitment requested later this evening at the business meeting. So at that, I'll take any other further questions.
I guess, Esther, I kind of have a question back towards you. You were mentioning, again, that it seems like that slide with the yellow highlight is a pretty important slide.
Right.
And I think this is nicely presented. I'm following it pretty well. And you were saying about the county's perspective?
Yeah, I
I
think.
just got a little lost. Could you say that again?
What I'm saying is, this slide gives us a projection for if we get various levels of state grant money, and it offsets our debt service payment only. And I think we can anticipate that the county might say, well, if you get a state grant, can't we share in the discount that affords? So reduce our payment too. Yes, I'm just saying.
So their percentage for their
Well, what-
25% of the usage would go down even further?
Well,
I'm just
wondering- Did they mention this?
We're live and on camera here, but
That's-
yes,
I
I hear
know.
you. I hear, that's loud and clear. Yeah, I think it is an important point that this facility is heavily used by county residents.
Yeah.
They very much enjoy it, so
Yeah.
it's a compelling
Okay.
reason for us all to partner in this investment.
Thanks.
And
But
especially
and
if
Chris, are you-
it becomes a multi-purpose use.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
we will have even
I think I
broader.
already said on the news today that it was gonna be an ice skating rink in the winter, so.
Yes, yes.
Potentially in a few years after we
It was our
reopen.
picture.
Are you making the same presentation to the county, or,
We have yet to be invited, but their staff has access to all of the same information.
yeah, and they're considering this next week?
Yes. Okay. All right, well, thank you, and I think I'm turning it back to Tony.
Yeah, just quickly, we have just a couple more slides to finish up. And I want to kind of pick up where I left off with, I think the last thing I said was, keep in mind all the numbers that we show you are estimates. I would say the same thing of what we just heard from Chris. Obviously, there's a lot of things that still need to be worked out before the numbers are finalized. I did just want to add quickly, before we leave the McCormick Field discussion, that second bullet there, and we talk about the investments that the budget team will be looking to build into next year's budget. One of those would be that increase in the CIP contribution. So even though we will be utilizing fund balance to avoid impacting any of the current planned projects, we will have to increase that CIP contribution that is part of the general fund budget, and that'll be stepped up over a 2 to 3 year period. Obviously, we don't know exactly what that number is going to be yet. It would be potentially a maximum of 875, but it obviously depends very much on where we land on this chart. And so we'll keep you all posted on that as we go through the budget process. Okay, so just to finish up, summary and next steps. I'm not going to go through the key takeaways again. I think we covered those already. Just want to remind you all of the schedule. I think as we mentioned already, we'll be back with another work session on March 28th. which will focus on capital and some of the other items that we will be providing you all with some feedback from today's work session. We'll also look to bring forward the adoption of fees and charges at that next formal meeting on March 28th. And then finally, we'll wrap up with our final work session on April 11th with the city manager's proposed budget coming to you on May 9th, a public hearing on May 23rd, and then hopefully, if we stay on schedule, we'll have budget adoption on June 13th of this year. So I think that might be the last slide.
Hopefully, just not at the next meeting.
I'm sorry.
The last meeting in June.
Yeah.
Give us a little
We tr-
breathing room.
Yeah, we try and avoid that last
Yeah.
meeting in
Yeah.
June if we can. So I do believe that's the last slide. So any additional questions?
Not for you, Tony. I don't. I just want to say I really appreciate the incredible amount of work that's gone into not just putting together all of this for us for today, but also the work around McCormick. And I'm happy to see what we can do under pressure. I was, joking, not joking, that we've got other facilities like Thomas Wolfe, major facilities in the city that are going to take significant investment. But I hope that this helps us figure out how we can build that and do it again for the next facility that's going to need it. These are big numbers, and I think historically Asheville's just kind of moved along sort of methodically, but we've now done some significant projects in the last few years. The River Arts District project, the new public safety station coming online, this project, the need for Thomas Wolfe. So I think we're figuring out how that works, and that's good because we're going to need to do more of it.
And I think mostly we are figuring out about long-term maintenance and how important we need to value that in addition to new items that we add to our capital asset.
And we've talked a little bit about the idea of having a bond referendum around for significant amount of capital projects we know are in the pipeline that do concern things like retrofitting our existing public safety stations and other things that involve significant maintenance, if you will, or redevelopment almost. And I think the problem, though, with these kinds of facilities like a ball field or a concert venue is you can kind of maintain them along the way, but that at some point they need like a complete
Major.
redo. And that's just the nature of the game. So somewhat inevitable. Anybody else? We have a moment for our next meeting. Any other questions? Any other comments? No. Okay, we are adjourned from this meeting and see you in about 26 minutes.
Thank you.